Welcome back to Lehto Files. I'm Chris Lehto, retired F-16 pilot, and this is part 2. I want to cover the sections I missed in the blockbuster UAP disclosure hearing on 1 May 2025. It really was amazing, but we'll go through some of the interesting things that happened, and then I'll cover the final section that I didn't cover. So if you haven't watched part 1, go ahead and check that out. Link is in the description. And now let's get to part 2. Okay, so first thing I want to cover is the photo that Lou shared. So he says clearly that it was unverified, but he says there's this giant object. It was taken, the image was taken from a cockpit at 21,000 feet. And he says the object could be 600 to 1,000 feet in diameter. And it looks like it's pareidolia. If you look here, Mick immediately came out and said, yeah, why does Lou share this? Is he not good at finding this stuff? And I think Lou won't do it again because as we look here, yeah, you can find the coordinates relatively easily, right? The community is very good at finding this stuff. And so they found the coordinates on Google Earth, thanks to Justin. He shared this with me from UAP Society YouTube. And if you look, those are the coordinates, and you can manipulate it in Google Earth to get the exact angle from where it was taken from at 21,000 feet. And so it shows one giant crop circle, right? That would have looked light, and then there was a darker crop circle underneath it. So it really gave the optical illusion that it was a giant craft with, a shadow. And I don't know, would it look like that in person? Maybe, but it seems like as you're flying by it, wouldn't you see that the shadow wouldn't change? So was this done on purpose or not sure? But either way, I know he shared another photo. It wasn't in a forum this large, right? So I don't think he will do this again. Surely, it's too bad. I think he will definitely recover. He's a tough guy. He was on my show just recently, and he said, if you're not failing, you're not trying hard enough, you're not risking enough. But in this case, yeah, I'm sure he will not do this again, and he'll get the photos verified, at least sending them out to the community, right? Because immediately, the debunking community will go after and seriously analyze every image that Lou shares, right? So I think he must have had access to other images. Look at Eric Delgado's video from an airline cockpit, right? That's what he wanted to talk about here. Lou did was a airline cockpit, and that interview on my channel is amazing with Eric Delgado, and he has a video. It's 8-minute long video of an orb. He has another witness with him who was a previous F-15 pilot. So that is just a great example. So I think there are other amazing examples to show that airline pilots are seeing these things, and it's not just military aircrew. So I think Lou could have made that point without sharing this unverified photo. So unfortunate. I'm sure he will not do that again. And of course, that's all they're talking about, right, on X. Not all the blockbuster information that came out. Chris Mellon's unbelievable arguments. Why aren't we seeing any of the UAP radar data? Why have none of the videos he's seen been released? Why haven't they been shared with Aero, etc.? As well as Eric Davis just saying outright, yeah, we have the craft. We don't know how it really works, but we definitely have it, the metamaterials, all that. And then Kirk McConnell talking about how we really need better whistleblower protections, as well as Tim Gallaudet sharing that he received many stories, as well as his firsthand interaction with GoFast. He's already talked about that in the previous hearing, but still, yeah, Blockbuster Burleson's there asking fantastic questions. So anyway, go check out part 1. This will be part 2. I just wanted to cover that image, which is unfortunate. The next thing I noticed is that, so Tim Gallaudet talked about climate science, and he came out against it, saying that there is no global warming. And I've already gotten comments saying that, I'm brainwashed by the global warming elite and everything. But I think it's pretty clear that we are in a current extinction. If you look at the level of extinctions going on, just how many species have been lost, it's mirrors or is very close to the past 5 major extinctions we've had on this planet. And you can also look at ice core data, and that seems pretty legitimate. So yeah, I think we should definitely look at it from both angles. I'm not saying that you can't make an argument that it's not human induced. But I think the argument that it is human induced and we are in an Anthropocene major extinction event, I think is, to me, seems pretty clear. But that being said, look at the video. They already got marked as they got the little, climate change. If you can read that. So it says there, they got this little climate change banner. It says United Nations climate change refers to long-term shifts in temperatures and weather patterns. Human activities have been the main driver of climate change, primarily due to the burning of fossil fuels like coal, oil, and gas. And yeah, it is super annoying when you get these banners on YouTube, and it always comes with any sort of anti-mainstream argument. And I think maybe YouTube should just stop putting these things out there. And it's their, trying to stop misinformation, etc. But information is still information. You can make the argument. Like, I would listen to Tim Gallaudet's argument. He obviously knows at least much more than the average Joe, right? He was National Oceanic Atmospheric one-star admiral. He did that for his entire career. So I do put more weight in his arguments and will listen. That would be great if we aren't causing climate change. I would feel much better about being a human, but I think there's a lot of science going the other way as well. And we saw for decades that the fossil fuel industry did fund a lot of pretty sketchy studies that were done. So anyway, I thought it was funny that they got a little mark there. And if you mention it, that's all the people talk about. So try and look through those things and listen to the actual information. So I missed in the first part the actual opening statements, and the audio is pretty bad. So I have the captions turned on, and I'll try and fix the audio after. So hopefully it'll be better. But let's try and listen to the opening statements from Representative Anna Paulina Luna.
I appreciate actually ran your book directly, so appreciate you for being here as well and all of your hard work. As you know, up until really the last Congress, I think it was Representative Burchett that was actually leading out the investigation totally on his own. So credit due where it's deserved. Mr. Burchett's been really, I think, at the forefront of this fight. We do have an opportunity right now where we are seeing not just a complete push for transparency out of the current administration on this topic, but also too we have bicameral and bipartisan support on this. So thank you very much, Lou, for your help, and then also to the experts and people being here today to testify and really to tell us and help lead us out, or lead out the investigations with us. Again, this is a community effort. This is not just, Democrat, Republican thing, even just an American thing, right? There's a massive push for this for good reason. We know recently in working with the National Archives, they were able to actually update on the archives website all things UAP. There will continue to be documents scanned and updated. And beyond that tab page, you citizen journalists can actually go forward, do the research yourself, help us ask the tough questions. And then I can also tell you that we have posted dates for the next UAP hearing. We are going to be doing two. One is going to be government focused. We are asking various appointees. I don't want to release the names yet, but we have been getting good response on them. We will make those names known soon, as well as military and or former military that will be coming forward. Also to note that we were told by one of Mr. Burleson's staffers that's helping us to lead out this investigation about someone that wants to come forward in regards to a crash retrieval program. And so that's pretty interesting to hear someone going on record about that. Obviously, we've had a lot of people try to dispel the research that the UAP community has done. And so we're just simply putting out the facts and letting the American people, really the world decide for themselves. But I'd also like to
Okay, just stop it there. So already she's released some great information. So it sounds like there's a website that they're going to start posting UAP data. That's awesome. So it's not just Aero that we're waiting for to release information. It looks like they're going to do it on their own. So that's awesome. So pumped for that. Love to see that. And then she said they're going to have 2 hearings. So great to get that information as well. And they're publishing the dates on that. All I've heard about is the May 13th hearing, but now we have 2 more hearings. So after this, but now we'll have real hearings. And she said one will be government focused, and it sounded like the other one will be military, and that we will have someone from the crash retrieval program. So I wonder if that will be Jake Barber, if Jake Barber will go under oath. Would you also have Matthew Brown there? That would be amazing. That's what we had in 2023, right? David Grush came out. He made the interview with Ross Coulthart, and then a month later, he went and did the hearing. So yeah, going to be an exciting next month.
If you think so. Representative Brunson?
Thank you, Anna. I first want to just say thank you again to Tim for leading the charge on this. When it wasn't popular, it was difficult, and it took a lot of courage, and we all recognize that. And I just want to acknowledge that. And I want to say thank you to Anna for her leadership. And I'll tell you, she is amazing to work with. She is very humble in her attitude and her approach. She doesn't. She likes to, to let other people join in the credit. And she is a very gracious and good leader for this task force. I want to say thank you to everyone that has come forward, from Lou to Mr. Mellon to Mr. Brush and others that have taken bold risks, Mr. Graves, who's here, who've taken a bold step and at the risk of their reputation and their career. There's a lot of people that have sacrificed their career in order to get information out to the American people. We're grateful for as well for the cooperation that we're getting with Tulsi Gabbard, and whose Directors Initiatives Group is actively harmonizing classification guides to facilitate responsible releases. She's been very effective with the JFK assassination records and others.
Okay, just pause it there. So already Burleson was just awesome in this hearing as a cover in part 1. So he mentions here, and thanks Tim Gallaudet for coming out when it was difficult to do. I think it's still difficult to do, right? We don't have people just coming out of the woodwork. And you'll see Kirk McConnell talks about that in part 1. And it's interesting he mentions Tulsi Gabbard here, talking about the classification guides, because that was a major point that Chris Mellon said, is that the classification guide completely changed. And we all saw it, right? You could FOIA, you could get information. Greenwald was making some traction. And then all of a sudden, the Navy came out and said anything related to UAP is classified. And that's just freaking ridiculous. That's so ridiculous. And so we really do need that classification guide rewritten. And that alone should push a lot of this to get unclassified. Because why have we not seen any real videos, right? All we've seen is clearly debunked videos from Aero. So,
and then the last thing I want to say is that this is not a one-time thing. This will not be. It's clear this is not a one-time data dump. This is a systemic change to the process and the way that we are transparent with the American people. And with that, we're working on legislation that will put that into practice. And again, thank you everyone for being here. I'm looking forward to today's hearing.
okay, yeah, this is a systemic process. That's what we need. Classification guide, like it's that boring work that everyone skips over and complains about. But that's the work that needs to be done to actually declassify all this stuff, right? The only way you can fight a bureaucracy is with better bureaucracy, I think, or just chainsawing it. But chainsawing it, everybody freaks out.
Thank you all for being here. I'll be very brief. Lou, thank you for the introduction. Thank my colleagues up here for their kind words. I'm not sure what that's all about. I think I'm buying pizzas after this thing. They're crazy. I got a daughter that rides horses. I don't know how I'm going to get home today.
Or shit.
But it is a pleasure being here, and I want to thank the people that are sitting right there, some dear friends of mine, people in the media and elsewhere that are always kind to me. We don't agree on a dadgum thing politically, but we do agree that this is the biggest cover-up of our lifetime, and we need to get to the bottom of it. And I want you folks to know out there that we believe, and for so many years, people that believe like we do have had to live in the shadows. And when you bring it up, you get criticized, and people say all kinds of awful things about you. Dadgum, I'm over that. We know this thing's covered up, and we're going to blow the dadgum lid off of it. So thank y'all for being here. Let's get it.
Yeah, Tim Burchett, man. He's so good. I'm so glad. All those people were reelected. I mean, it shows, right? It gives you traction. People will support you. So I hope more Congress people can speak out and realize that, this is a topic people are very passionate and interested in.
What I'd like to do is, because time is precious, especially for the members, obviously they have a real job to do. This is part of it, but they have a whole lot of other responsibilities. So with that said, I'd like to first begin by thanking specifically Representative Luna from the 13th District, if I'm not mistaken, of Florida, for her leadership in this particular forum and on this topic. This would not have been possible if it was not for Representative Luna in her pursuit of the truth. She has served her country quite honorably, and her husband as well. If any of you have been in the military, may have run across him. So on behalf of a very grateful nation, ma'am, thank you for what you continue to do and your continued service to this nation and that of your family. It is greatly appreciated, and your service specifically as well with regards to the military. So thank you. Secondly, I'd like to thank Representative Eric Burleson, somewhat newer to this topic than some of the other folks, maybe on the Senate side and even the House side, who has also championed truth and transparency within the American government. I would refer to him as a healthy skeptic, which I think is important. Always keeping an open mind, allow the data to speak for itself. And in my interactions with Representative Burleson, I've seen him to be every time and exclusively honorable and truthful. And he is now, I think it's translating into the forum you see here, with media present. We're going to have a very interesting conversation today. And again, this is only possible because of the three individuals up here. So if you have time later on, I would suggest you give him a good deal of thanks for what he is doing for our nation. And last but certainly not least, is Representative Tim Burchett from Tennessee, who has been spearheading this topic for quite some time at great personal risk to his political career. As most of you know, that's one thing that politicians tend to avoid is risk, especially when it comes to election time. And Representative Burchett, I would probably define him as bringing a working man's perspective, a common sense perspective to the bureaucracy we call Washington, D.C. Certainly a breath of fresh air, and a champion for, again, truth and transparency for our government and for our institutions. So with that said, I'd like to offer a quick round of applause for them.
I would say Burleson is just killing it, right? He's probably the most effective because he really does have the skeptical mainstream perspective, but he's obviously very intelligent. He does know science from the questions he's asked. I think he is knowledgeable, and yeah, I think he will be very beneficial to this. And you notice he stays through, I believe, the whole conference, right? I still haven't gotten to the second part. We'll cover that in a little bit, or the last part with the innovation panel. But he stays the whole time, and he is dialed in, asking the questions, really interested, and that's what we need, right? That's all we're asking for is you can be skeptical, that's fine, but at least be interested and respectful. And so I think Burleson will be very effective for convincing. If we can convince Burleson, right? If all these whistleblowers convince Burleson, then he will probably be the best mouthpiece for disclosure.
Second, I'd like to thank the esteemed panelists that are with us here today. Did you all hear me okay in the back? Okay, if you adjust your monitor, I can use my drill sergeant voice if I need to. We're going to have 3 separate sections with panelists with extremely backgrounds. I'm not sure there's ever been assembled a panel like this in front of the American people. And I don't say that lightly because I've been part of a lot of meetings, a lot of sensitive meetings, both in the intelligence community and within the national security apparatus. We have elements from academia, elements from the scientific community, elements from the national security arena, elements from the intelligence community, all speaking here today to you about what they know regarding the UAP topic. The assembly here is, dare I say, possibly even historic. And I'm truly honored to be with you here today. I will be your moderator. Real quick reminder for our panelists. I'd like to, when you're asking a question, try to keep it within 3 minutes, Eric. If I go beyond that, I might have to kind of get the conversation directed to some other questions because we do have a lot of panelists. And I also have a tendency to talk a lot, so I'm going to try to keep myself in check as well. But panelists, if you can try to keep your responses to 3 minutes. Some panelists have for you a presentation. So for those who have a presentation, we'll do the presentation first, and then we'll be followed up with questions. And of course, esteemed members of Congress, if you have any questions at any time, please feel free to ask them, and we will certainly have our panelists address those questions for you. One more reminder, again, a security reminder, I know I said it before, but for anybody who's coming here after, I'm going to be asking questions. Some of those will be very pointed questions. For those of you who have a security clearance or who have held a security clearance, I ask that you please be mindful that this is an unclassified venue and not to discuss classified information. For the record, none of us look good in an orange jumpsuit. Certainly I don't. So we want to be mindful of that. I'd also like to thank the media. Thank each and every one of you for being here. I know this is a topic that for quite some time was fraught with stigma and taboo. This would have been considered career suicide for any respectable journalist to cover this topic, just like it is for politicians and our elected leaders of this nation. And times are changing. Times are changing because of you. So I want to do a hearty thank you to the members of media who are covering this. And last but not least, and probably perhaps most important, I would like to thank each and every one of you in the audience. Each and every one of you that's tuning in, each and every one of you that's watching this, each and every one of you that might be sitting on your sofa at home or around a dinner table and are interested in this topic and have asked questions. This is because of you. Our elected officials put this on because of you, not me, and not even our esteemed guests, because of you.
I think he's actually right though. The only way it is going to change is to change the mainstream perspective. You know, when you can say it at a party and it's not laughed at and it's not a joke, I think that's when we'll probably see some actual real change. And we're not there yet. You can't say it. Like say it at the next party where you're not around your UFO buddies. If you have even UFO buddies, like I don't even have any UFO buddy. It's all online, right? Say in real life when you're not at a convention, say it and see if you how serious you're taken.
And that should tell you something. That means democracy is working, folks. That means transparency is working. That means we, the people, are working. That's a lot. That's profound. This is democracy in action, and you're watching it. So I want to thank each and every one of you. And I also want to thank real quick the staff here on Hill that helped put this together and coordinate this. I know it's a bit of a zoo, but thank you so much for being patient with us and helping us with the audio visual and the media and the seating. It is very much appreciated. So with that, let's go ahead and begin, shall we?
Okay, I would say if they should work on the audio next time, and it'd be nice if we could see the slides. So just, I know it's not easy, but just room for improvement. I'm sure they know that.
So I'd like to introduce the first of our panelists. Here is Dr. Andy Loeb.
Okay, awesome. So go to part 1 of my show, and you will check it out, and then you can see basically all the way till innovation panel, and that we'll cover that now. So he introduces Avi Loeb, and now let's go to the innovation panel. I haven't watched that.
As you can see, we could probably stay all day with just one panelist alone. Lots to discuss. We are barely scratching the surface here. The next discussion is really going to be part of a scientific discussion. And so the two panelists you have here are experts in their own fields and recognized as a global leader in their particular expertise.
Okay, so like I said, Burleson's still there, man. So look at that. He's taken 3 hours and 45 minutes of his day, so 4 hours of his day. He's definitely interested in this topic. Also, we have Avi Loeb sitting next to Ryan Graves. Okay, so that's interesting. See them talking. Maybe Ryan can tell him, yeah, it's not, you know, it was real. It was a real gimbal was UAP. You also have Leslie Kane sitting between James Fox and Steve Bassett. thought that was cool.
What I'd like to do first is introduce Ms. Anna Brady Estevez, founding partner at American Deep Tech, former SBA Innovation Advisor for Kaufman Fellow, and on the UAP Advisory Board. But what you may not know is that Ms. Brady Estevez is deeply involved with the National Science Foundation. And that involvement really includes looking at pioneering new ways to invest American talent, scientific talent, into new and emerging areas of science. Right? Where do we decide to put our money and our effort in the next 20 years? Right? Where do we get that return on investment? What does that look like? Right? And how do we force ourselves to think outside the box to be creative? Don't invent tomorrow's technology. Invent the technology after tomorrow. And it's that type of creative thinking that has traditionally kept this country ahead of everybody else. And I ask you to, when she speaks, listen to what she has to say, because this is, in my opinion, this is the future. Not just this topic, but any topic requiring innovation. Because if you don't innovate, you stagnate. If you don't stagnate, you perish. That's just the bottom line. Right? We live in a competitive world. The next individual is a colleague and friend of mine, Mr. Mike Gold. Mr. Mike Gold is president of the Civil and International Space at Redwire, member of the NASA UAP Independent Study Team, former NASA Associate Administrator for Space Policy and Partnerships, former Acting Associate Administrator for the Office of International and Interagency Relations and Senior Advisor to the Administrator for International and Legal Affairs, former Vice President for Civil Space at Maxar Technologies, former Director of DC Operations and Business Growth at Bigelow Aerospace. You might remember that word from somewhere else and that involvement. And last but certainly not least, as a member of NASA, am I correct to say a mission manager with the Artemis team? Did I get that right? Because I've got two things wrong so far today, so I want to make sure you're right.
So I had Mike on the show, interviewed just a few weeks ago. He had COVID actually, and he was getting construction done on inside his house, and his family was there. So it was an interview in his car, but he gave a full hour of his time. And so what I think he's going to argue for, and I think this is fantastic to put it on the stage, is that someone at NASA does the two things that the NASA Independent UAP Study Team asked them to do, right, from their final recommendations. And the first thing is to go back and systematically look through the NASA archives. NASA has tons of videos that are unclassified, right? They're already published on the internet, and to go back and systematically review those. A lot of people have said, yeah, they're not going to put the interesting videos up on there. Yes, but what if they missed some, right? Or maybe there are interesting videos up there. So he said to go back and look through that. The second recommendation they had from the study team, and that was the point of the study team, is to figure out what is the best way to get UAP data for NASA. The second way is to do the aviation safety reporting system, to use that as a tool. And that is a anonymous reporting system. So commercial pilots could use it. So Ryan Graves, well, I'm sure we'll be talking to Mike Gold after this, and I'm sure they've talked before this. So that needs to happen and could definitely help. So let's see what he says.
I'm a recovering attorney. They wouldn't let me close the prior mission. So I was the architect of the Artemis Accords, however, the global partnership with 54 countries to explore Moon, Mars, and beyond.
Excellent. And that's it, right? explore moon, Mars, and beyond. There is something for you to consider. There was an estimate done that the future of mankind, our species, is not here. In fact, if you were to look at the financial opportunities, it was estimated that 1 times 10 to the 18th power amount of money this world has ever made globally in all its time as modern civilization. Multiply that by a factor of 18, and that's the value of the resources that lie within the inner asteroid belt of our solar system. Right. So the future is there. As a microbiologist and immunologist, there's one primary directive for all life systems that we know, and that's to expand. If you don't expand, you will perish. In fact, you can look at a petri dish, and if you put the right amount of nutrients, bacteria will do the same. Take a plant, give it nutrients and water, it will grow and take over. That is the primary directive of all life, and we are no exception to that. So keep that in mind as these two individuals are going to talk to you about the importance of this topic, the UAP topic, and how it relates to the scientific community. Am I mistaken that you have a presentation for us? So what I'd like to do is turn it over. First of all, welcome our two guests, our esteemed guests. And ma'am, did you have a presentation, or are you going to do the just questions and answers?
I'll go verbal, yeah.
Okay, verbal, got it. Mike, come on up and let's get you started.
Thanks so much. Is it okay when I go from here?
Yeah.
Great. Sure. Wanted to like you. In terms of expansion, I can tell you my doctor says I'm expanding far too much every day.
Yeah, me too. I'm just saying.
A lot of trouble. Thank you so much, Lou, not only for today, but for all you have done to push this topic. You are an American hero, as well as the congressman and many others from this room, from the journalists to the scientists, the advocates, the pilots. It's just an honor to be here and I appreciate what everyone has done. Also, thank you, Redwire Board of Directors, for letting me out of the meeting early. That was a wonderful discussion. I think this is going to be a lot more exciting. If I could point you to my opening slide, that is actually an image taken by the Blue Ghost lunar lander with Redwire Argus cameras. I'm going to get in why that is such an extraordinary image in a moment. But before we get there, we were having a discussion about substances and what these new substances look like, new materials, what this UAP technology would be. And I've been given the challenging, if not an enviable task of saying, how could UAP technology impact innovation without knowing quite what that UAP technology is, even fundamentally? So what I'd like to try and do today is give you an example of how microgravity is impacting innovation and really almost every industrial field, and how that could be transformative. I don't know if extraterrestrial civilizations are using this. I think they likely would be, but I think this is an example of how a fundamental shift in technology can change everything. Our company, Redwire, has been conducting experiments on the International Space Station, on the space shuttle, for literally decades. We've flown hundreds of experiments over the past 35 plus years. We have 11 experiments active on the International Space Station right now, more than any other company. You see Senator John Glenn running one of our experiments there. The first one I'd like to show you is the biofabrication facility, the PFF, or graded acronyms at Redwire. If you can play the video, please. This is, by the way, an over 400-pound payload. It broke the table at our facility in Greenville, Indiana. Much easier to handle in orbit. That astronaut, a Cubs fan, working very quickly, like coffee, 20 times speed, but he's installing what is a biofabrication unit. And that system has allowed us to manufacture human tissue in space. It resulted in the first human meniscus being printed in space. Who needs a meniscus? I have no idea. Probably use two. Right? Exactly. This is the impact of microgravity. That if you try to create that meniscus on Earth, and again, I'm a recovering attorney, so I'm going to put it simply, it squishes. You couldn't do that in a gravity environment. It's not space per se. It's the lack of gravity that allows you to do these incredible things.
Okay, so first, I can't believe I didn't know Lou has a background in microbiology. I need to look into that. Yeah, and then Mike is funny, right? He threw in a couple zingers, and it's usually around his expanding waistline. I think he made a first joke about that in my interview with him. The funny thing is, they're printing the human tissue, right, using microgravity, but human tissue grows just fine in gravity, like it really does. Happens billions of times. Seems like there is probably a better way to do it.
Subsequent to the success we had with the meniscus, we printed live cardiovascular tissue, and we brought it back from the International Space Station, still live. Think what this could mean for people suffering from heart disease, the creation of heart patches. And of course, the goal of all of this is ultimately to create whole organs in space.
I mean, that would be amazing, though, right? If that's the best way we can do it. Access to space is about to get very, very cheap with Starship. It's going to drop it by 100-fold at least, maybe 1,000-fold. And so I think in the very near future, we will have space manufacturing. So this would be amazing. I still think you could just grow a meniscus if you knew, like Michael Levin says, how to program regeneration. He can regenerate planarians. Actually, why couldn't you regenerate or reprogram human stem cells if you can reprogram planarians?
How many of us have had friends and relatives die while waiting on an organ donation list? This could change all of that. Additionally, because we would be using your own stem cells to create the tissue, the organs, we would avoid the dangerous and expensive anti-rejection therapies that you go through. So we see how microgravity could have dramatic impact in terms of life sciences. Also, pharmaceuticals. Redwire has flown 28 pill boxes. These are systems where we take pharmaceuticals, drugs, fly the seed crystals. And seed crystals, by the way, they're like a sourdough starting kit. They're what the drugs are made out of. And when you create seed crystals in microgravity, they're larger, more uniform, and that results in drugs with better efficacy, better longevity, fewer side effects. Here's an example that is very near and dear to my heart, insulin. We partnered with Eli Lilly. We flew insulin. Over on the left side of that, that's what insulin seed crystals look like when you create them on Earth. Over on the right side, that's what insulin looks like in space, the seed crystals. Again, I got a B- in biology as a high school student. Even I can tell the difference between one and the other. And because of those larger, more uniform crystals, you could have a version of insulin. We've seen versions of cancer treatment drugs that, whereas you have to go through chemotherapy that will be injected, again, long, painful, you could potentially get to a version of the drug where it can be administered orally. So a tremendous difference here relative to the pharmaceutical sector. And by the way, it's not just us who know this, it's China. And the Chinese have their space station, they're going after this same research. So Congressman would guide to look at the International Space Station, replacing it with a commercial space station. This revolution with biotech and microgravity is going to happen. The only question, is it going to happen here in America, free world, or is it going to be happening in China? And I do not want to be buying my next generation of pharmaceuticals and drugs from the Chinese. So we need to continue to support this and create new developments, but this is just life sciences and biotech. Again, micrograv will impact semiconductors, the same principles. When you form crystals in space, you can create new types of semiconductors that are more powerful, more tolerant of heat. Agriculture, you can create seeds, new types of plants that can flourish in the desert. We have a greenhouse that we're flying in space, looking at many of that efforts. You see that there. We also have systems for what's called Z-band fiber, where it's a new type of fiber optic that can be incredibly more powerful. Again, every aspect of our technological society could be changed by this innovation. Is this something that UAP are using? Is this new substances that they're using? I don't know, perhaps. But you see how this field will revolutionize everything. And I believe in the future, the leaders in microgravity will not only be the leaders in economics, but in national security as well. As a matter of fact, that meniscus print, the customer for that was the Uniformed Services University, because the number one entry to our men and women in uniform are meniscus takers. Now I'd like to talk about who wants to see some unclassified data, right? Let's talk about some imagery that we're getting from NASA. As Lou mentioned, I was proud to be a member of NASA's UAP Independent Study Team. We had some very common sense recommendations, one of which that I testified here in the House not too long ago, alongside the great Elizondo and others, was that we need to go into the NASA archives, get the imagery, review it, make it public, and look at what we've got. This is an example that hit the internet not too long ago. Is it a Tic Tac? It's on Mars? I don't know. I'm not qualified to say, but someone should be looking at it, and we should be collecting and collating the data. Here's one that's even more interesting to me. Lunar horizon glow. This is a phenomenon that we first saw with surveyor systems. This is name, a globe that we're seeing on the horizon of the moon. We saw it with the robotic surveyors, and what you see in the upper left-hand side are sketches that Apollo astronauts made of this phenomenon. A glowing dome, streaks of light shooting out from the lunar surface, pretty extraordinary. And then most recently, this was my cover slide, with the Blue Ghost system, which is NASA's Commercial Lunar Payload Services program, CLIPS, a wonderful public-private partnership to reach the moon. With Redwire Argus cameras, we took this image of the lunar horizon glow. What you might hear if you go on a NASA website or talk to some in the scientific community is that this effect is from dust that has been electrostatically charged and then levitated to create this impact. Now, again, I'm not saying one way or the other, but Dr. I should go back to give him credit. Dr. Manischew's director, I'm gonna mess up his name. I apologize. It's in the slides. But a wonderful professor who's been associated with UAP Disclosure Fund and doing work on this topic, provided me these slides. And I can tell you, NASA's own research, lab, other systems, is putting some big question marks as to even if there is enough dust to create this event.
Okay, so interesting so far. I didn't really like the first part of his brief when it seemed more like a Redwire commercial. I don't know, or at least I think people could argue against it. But I guess I could see his argument for the innovation board, right? If that's what you need to talk about. So that's why he started with that. There's this image from Mars, and it almost could be the pareidolia effect that I mentioned at the beginning of this, where you could just have a dark colored object that looks like it's giving a shadow, right? So this could be a rock in the distance, a little bit, a few meters in the distance, and then this could be another discoloration of rock, and now that would look like possibly a flying object, and that's where you could easily determine that from another camera, right? That's why we definitely need multiple images of something to confirm. Well, a single photo is not going to prove anything. I think even a single video, unless the precedence is unbelievable, right, from military systems, it's not going to prove it. You need multi-spectral, and that's why I love the radar captures that of the recent Tic Tac, right? Because they have radar, they have visual, and they have the FLIR. So that's 3 spectrums. So that's why I think it's so powerful. I'd never heard of this, right? I've seen this image, but it's interesting when he talks about the shadows going in the opposite direction. Shadows of lunar rocks point in the wrong direction. Impossible lighting of the surface through Venetian blinds effect. So what he said is it could be dust in the air raised electrostatically makes it look green. And so electrostatically, it seems like a lot of these UAPs are using some form of electrostatics. And if you remember, I think my most popular video this year was actually on NASA scientists determining that there is a small force based on electrostatics. And so that would be a new force that we haven't understood. You know, it's not a kinematic force, it's based on electrostatic. So that would be like some sort of warp drive. Although if you do look, we do have photon pressure. You can push something in space. As Avi Loeb talked about, Oumuamua is pushed by the sun's rays, right? It's pushed by sunlight. Again, how is that kinematics? And it's, yeah, they say that, I love this again, and I railed against our current understanding of physics in part 1, but also think about this is, so photons, as we understand them, photons, again, never been directly observed. We just note their effects, and then we postulate that a photon solves that. They say photons are massless particles, right? I also talked about space-time, and we don't know where inertia comes from. Photons are massless particles, right? And yet they can induce a force, right? Mass times acceleration. They can induce a force on objects in space, so through photon pressure. So how is something that is massless induce a force? And that's where they say, oh, a photon is a particle and a wave. That's what they say. So that's why, because it's a wave, because it's massless, but it can induce a force like a particle. And so again, it's one of those just givens that, yeah, a photon has no mass, and yet it can impart a force, right? How is that possible? And they square this corner using all these complicated math that you can't possibly understand, right? Or you can, but once you've gone down that road so far, it's almost like you're brainwashed into thinking, yeah, of course, that's how it is. So interesting. Thought this image was interesting. And like he mentioned, it is the archives of NASA, right?
If there is enough dust, create this event, which looks unlikely, and that if dust could be electrostatically charged to cause what looks like a second sunrise. And that's not the sun, by the way, it's below the horizon. That is an extraordinary image. And by the way, when I first saw this picture, I was like, is that algae on the moon? And what you're seeing is light refraction occurring due to, I don't know. So I don't know what this is. Is it a dome? Is it some type of natural phenomenon that we don't understand or aren't aware of? But I'll tell you, definitely, it's a unidentified anomalous phenomenon, which bears looking and bears understanding. And this is a good example, too, of even if it's a natural or prosaic phenomenon, there's something extraordinary occurring here. We should be delving into it. We should be studying it and understanding it. And on the off chance that it does turn out to be something extraordinary, we need to know what is occurring here. Additionally, here's another shot, publicly available from the NASA archives. You've seen some imagery of the triangular UAPs in the past. What's that? Debris? Satellites?
That's from the moon, right?
That's Apollo 17.
We had that picture.
Images from Apollo 17.
A few of us saw something like that last Friday.
Extraordinary. Satellites, debris, Klingons. What is it? I don't know. Who do you know? Congressman? You know what that is?
I know what the debunking argument will be a reflection on the glass through the window.
Why are we not investigating this? And what I would ask of our brave members of Congress with here is, again, with relatively little effort and money, we should be leveraging AI and ML to go into the NASA archives. So much of this has been digitized, more every day, and conduct a review of what's publicly available. We spend so much time here, justifiably so, talking about classified material, what's being hidden. Yet there's a treasure trove of data that, if not a smoking gun, certainly is fascinating and worth looking at and applying the scientific method to. And these images that you're seeing here, and here's more of another UAP from Apollo, more of potentially a Stonehenge, strange structures on the moon, lunar anomalies that look like Buddhist temples. And I'm not saying necessarily all of these have extraordinary explanations. Maybe some of them don't, maybe some of them do. But it certainly is worth the effort to investigate. And we're not doing that right now. Why?
So yeah, this is amazing. I wish he opened with this actually, and then went into the other, his other argument. I think this is a lot stronger, and probably the first part may have turned people off.
Because of the stigma, this pernicious stigma that prevents us from tackling it. And sir, that's where we're going to need your help. That I have many friends at NASA that are interested in this topic, fascinated by it, want to delve into it, but they need top cover. And that's why I'm so grateful to be offline, talk more about what we can do with a new NASA administrator coming in. And this isn't going to cost a lot of money. This could be done with very little time, very little effort, yet the results could be extraordinary. Finally, as we get.
And I think that's awesome, right? That's exactly what I was hoping for. We'll see if he mentions the aviation safety reporting system, but just talking direct to the congressperson in a live, open forum, right? So everyone sees where the information came from. And yeah, now direct NASA. So this must put pressure on NASA, right?
Back to technology, I just wanted to level set relative to what it takes to travel in space. 3 days to the moon, 7 to 10 months to Mars. I can tell you exposure to radiation during that trip, quite dangerous and challenging. 77,000 years to Proxima Centauri, our closest star. I mean, that's worse than my flights on United. That's rough. And then 1.7 million years to get to where we've seen some biosignatures for the first time. If we're truly going to explore space, we're going to need some innovative technology. And here we already spent some time discussing the Alcubierre warp drive. This was a Mexican physicist who did the initial work proving that within demonstrated science, and I would defer to Eric Davis here, but this is not extraordinary science, that a warp drive could exist. The challenge with Alcubierre's warp drive is that it would require roughly the mass of Jupiter converted into energy to operate. I mean, I had a Chevy Suburban, and that was not fuel efficient. This would be even more difficult.
I mean, look at the same thing, right? We basically had Lord Kelvin right before the Wright brothers flew, and he was head of the Science Society of the UK, right? Arguably, the furthest forward thinking organization on the planet. In just a few years before the Wright brothers flew, he said he argues it will be impossible for heavier than air flight. So basically, if you tried to cross the ocean, right, you're crossing it on a ship at that point, it's going to take many months. And then look, if you use a different method, if you fly based on things that your current science thinks is impossible, which is heavier than air flight, all of a sudden it takes a few hours, right? You go from months of time, or at least many weeks, to a few hours. And look at that. And the point is, it's a form, a method that is outside of our current understanding of science. And our current understanding of science in 1900 was heavier than air flight is impossible from Lord Kelvin, famous quote. And then, of course, it revolutionized.
But a scientist at NASA, what was then NASA EagleWorks, tweaked basically the architecture of the Alcubierre warp drive, and perhaps found some ways to get that down to the mass of the VW, something that we could work with. So these are the kinds of technologies that if there is a gravitic system or some kind of extraordinary technology, we must have it in order to reverse those distances and have America and our international partners lead in space exploration.
So he said they tweaked it and it went from the mass of Jupiter to a VW. It's quite the tweak.
Additionally, energy. I mean, if we are sitting on extraordinary technology, 0-point energy, the Casimir effect, as we discussed, think of the good we could do in terms of saving the environment, improving the economy, creating a post-scarcity society. It would be extraordinary. It would be wonderful. And let me just end by saying the reverse of that is we do not want to fall behind China relative to leveraging extraordinary technology. I don't know if there's alien tech out there. There may be, there might not be, but can we risk falling behind the Chinese in reverse engineering if there is such technology?
But of course, that's why we're keeping it secret. It's obviously just replace keep the red the same and make that Russia. And now we move forward and like, maybe we'll release it. And then they replace it with China and they're like, no, we can't. There's no way we can release this information. And that's precisely why they're not releasing any of this information, is because of that exact reason.
This is again where the stigma is so pernicious. But I'm sure China has its top officials working on this 24/7, coordinated, whereas us, separated, it's compartmentalized, it's MIT working on it, it's Caltech working on it. No, we cannot risk losing communist China because we can't take this issue seriously. We must not let a lack of vision turn into a lack of freedom. Thank you.
Okay, I guess it was good. He finished very strong for sure, and he gave his initial intro on Redwire, so that was interesting. Interesting, when I talked with him, he didn't mention anything about Redwire. it was just all about NASA. Also, he didn't mention the aviation safety reporting system. Maybe he'll talk about it in the question.
All right, well, thank you for the brief presentation, folks. Again, time is of the essence, so I'm going to make these as succinct as
Is
possible.
it okay if I present as well?
Yeah, absolutely. I'd love you to present. I've got questions actually about that, so please have the floor.
Well, I just wanted to say, I really appreciate like all the work you've done in microgravity and certainly for, any of these craft that are above, that are in space above the Montgomery, they have that access to microgravity should they choose to use it. At our firm, American Deep Tech, we're very focused on a number of areas of deep technology, including space tech, energy, and advanced bio, including one of our co-founders, Kat with Aspera. They believe they've identified a cancer kill switch, and I know you've worked together.
We're talking with her.
Yeah, and cancer kill switch in microgravity. So just, for pharmaceuticals that access to microgravity, you see the aging within 9 days, and it would take a year terrestrially for a tumor. So that ability to speed up that iteration on drug development is very important. So we've got some really interesting people that we work with, a CTO coming out of NASA, a branch chief coming out of Space Force, some very high growth entrepreneurs. We also work with some leaders, as our advisors and venture partners in the UAP space, because we see the keys, of these areas of technology to drive that abundance, that competitive advantage, and just societal benefits. So people like we're fortunate to have as our advisor Hal Puthoff, and also to work with people like Julia Mossbridge and Ryan Graves and Diane Finkhausen. So I know that they are active in so many areas of technology, but also in UAP. And so how did we come in my former roles, which I thank you so much for that kind introduction, which I've completed my roles in the US government, where I was the co-chair alongside NASA of the US Space Economy Interagency Working Group. We worked with exceptional innovation forward, UAP forward and open leaders across the interagency. And those meetings are public, they're available online, US Space Disruptors Day. And that was a day of about 10, sometimes 12 hours of presentations on in-space biotechnology, in-space semiconductors, US launch, also UAP, also advanced consciousness, AI, communications and satellites. So there was actually interagency leadership that co-hosted this UAP leading content from NASA, Space Force, DOE, DHHS, Air Force. These were all very senior people, NSF and SBA. So while I would say that in years past, before this great movement towards transparency and gratitude for those in the room who really led that, since the 2017 timeframe and before, time has changed. And innovation is not about, unfortunately, because we want everybody to come along. We appreciate that, it's great once you get beyond 50%. Innovation and science are not about consensus. We don't wait to get to 51%. This is the leaders are doing this. The fast followers are also doing this. And the reasons why they're doing this is because they're sitting in rooms, groups of people. We had an extended electrodynamics group of leaders from across the interagency and also the private sector. And they were working on advanced energy. They were working on advanced communications. They're funded entrepreneurs. At NSF Public Awards, we funded and I funded companies working on what the entrepreneurs later described as UAP adjacent or UAP inspired technologies. One of those, actually, multiple of those people have spoken having worked on programs that they can't go into great depth about. But certainly others are undertaking that private sector research where it's not about it being classified first. And this, but the point on how do you get your communications back and forth to Mars, without dealing with the 40-minute latency? How do you do that? And what are the approaches for breaking those barriers? How do you achieve this energy abundance and that more efficient launch capability? So it was these conversations on what could be achieved and what's already been in some cases declassified in terms of work and outcomes, or was never classified, really led to conversations where we invited in experts who then said, do you want my extended electrodynamics presentation, or you want my UAP presentation? We said, we'd like both of those. And so what that led to was receiving that tremendous presentation from Hal, from Charles Chase, and from others, and saying, actually, can give this to more people. And so they gave those types of presentations to hundreds of people. And what we found with those entrepreneurs was this was the highest level of engagement we ever got in any field of science or technology. I've seen people in the audience who are part of it shaking their heads yes. So the entrepreneurs were so eager, and scientists, to engage in the UAP science and technology. And as a frame of reference, when we talk about disruptive technology, I've worked with a few of them because I've had the opportunity to fund around 400 companies, so work with thousands of entrepreneurs. Those companies, from just a quarter billion plus put out, have gone on to raise 8.5 billion in follow-on financing and 17.5 billion in total market cap just in the early years. That's coming out of a place that the program, which is not the UAP program, but a program that has catalyzed well over $350 billion, from well less than 20, probably 12 billion put out over several decades. So these entrepreneurs, oftentimes these highest growth ones, regardless of what they're working in, it can be batteries, they're told never going to work. I mean, we all have batteries, right? People will say a higher performing battery, here's why it's not going to work. So these entrepreneurs are used to being told no and why not, and they still build things. And what's happening today, not just in America, but around the world, because the first time I saw these experiences was overseas, is people are seeing ultra advanced craft that are higher performing. And for people that are building the highest performing craft and the highest performing energy, they are not trying to unsee what they have seen, and they've caught on a wide range of sensors. There's the classified sensors, and then there's the sensors like this. We have imagery, on our phones from going out and seeing things. So I think that
So she's made some great arguments so far, and I think we are on the cusp of the actual space age, right? Because up until probably the next few years, it's been impossible to get to space. It was just cost prohibitive, and now you're going to see with Starship, which the technology has essentially been proven out. They just need to figure out the heat shields. I was at the second launch of Starship when the booster exploded. Man, it was so awesome. It was like this perfect circle, perfect spherical explosion I've never seen. And what you'll see is when the cost of space drops by 100-fold, like she mentioned there, you're manufacturing. And what Mike was talking about is that guy can move around that machine, right? 450 pounds on Earth, and now he's just moving it around in space. You could see a future where all of our manufacturing goes to space, right? Why not put it in space? Why take up precious land on Earth where we could make Earth into this, ecological paradise, and then put all your dirty manufacturing up into space where it weighs nothing? The other important point you mentioned there is they're not waiting. And I think that's a huge point, where if we can get mainstream thought to say, oh, wait a minute, this is possible, then you're just going to get more and more entrepreneurs who are saying, you know what, I don't care, I'm going to go and do it anyway, right? Like Faraday said, he's just going to do the experiments. He wasn't a theoretical scientist, he was an experimentalist. So you're going to get all these people out there, entrepreneurs, saying, okay, look, if it is true and the government has known about this and is just not sharing any of the information, then can we do it on our own? And so, yeah, it puts huge pressure on the government. This is the discovery aspect of disclosure. I think Lester Nare, who runs the UAP Disclosure Fund, I don't know if he runs it, but he definitely works on it, is that he said there's two efforts. Discovery is what you're seeing by Skywatcher, by Galileo. It's these civil, not related to government efforts, and they're going to just go find the information. And then you have the disclosure effort, which is working inside the government that we saw really from the first two panels. So both of these efforts will put huge pressure on disclosure.
Impetus to build things is what's driving this. And what would be the right levels to really go after this? You know, this is something that a few of us have spoken about, but my background's also as a strategist. So we do a lot of strategy math. And I used to be at BCG. And the question of, if you're building the highest performing systems, what type of resources would you put in place? So if we look at, you know, and I'm sharing kind of casually Googled numbers so we can get to better definition. But how much money went into the ISS, our long-term in-space laboratory? Some of the numbers online say that it was well over 70 billion for the US part of that. And that with other nations' contributions, it might be 150 billion. What was the cost of the Apollo program? That was 26 billion, from the 60s to the 70s. Some estimates put that at inflation adjusted well over 200, perhaps $250 billion. So if you were to ask me today, what is the right amount of money to be investing in these ultra high performing technologies, these Manhattan style projects? It's well into the hundreds of billions of dollars. That's the right answer today. Whether the US makes that investment or whether somebody else does, we are talking about advantage for multi-trillion-dollar markets. So some would say perhaps we made the right investments over time, that we've invested those tens of billions or those hundreds of billions. And if we have, how do we celebrate the accomplishments that might have come out of those programs? How do we give the recognition to those scientists, those people who have served, who perhaps have not been able to speak about their work? How do we derive value from that? How do we say these pieces that might have been constrained because you didn't have access to the tools everybody else has access to on the outside and the collaboration, how can we bring the pieces in a way that is respectful to national security and increases resilience and abundance? And I am concerned. I mean, I appreciate, I think many of us want transparency, but also how do we make that so the people who may have worked in this want to come forward? You know, so if we're offering them, oh, you built something, you give your resources, and here's some punishment, but that's going to be hard to get the technology out. And there's lots of ways that could be brought fully forth. It could be anonymized into a centralized clearinghouse. If there's valuable technology there that can help people in the United States and around the world, let's celebrate what's been built and let's fill the gaps that are there. So we see tremendous opportunity. The race is on. Some would say those are exceptionally large programs. Many of us have seen this wide range of phenomena, be they craft, be they orbs. The reason it matters, so sometimes the first time you see this phenomena, it's a point of interest and you say, wow, I kind of thought there was life off planet, whether it's life off planet or advanced terrestrial technology. But you think, well, okay, interesting. Now back to our day-to-day. What do we do with this? And so a number of us came to, because our core roles were advanced energy, advanced computation, advanced biology, the answer was people who are working in their core fields, biotechnology, quantum, that they're seeing some of the potential paths forward through this UAP adjacent technology. Can we classify it today? I don't know how. I mean, there are parts that we can say, stay away from this due to this risk. But the challenge on some of this is, if you're to say, well, classify UAP technology, you just got to stop working on it. For people that are familiar with the science and the technology, there are elements of this that are relevant to quantum and quantum entanglement. So what does that mean for our national posture on quantum? AI is interwoven with this. You talk about microgravity and advanced materials. So do we just not do certain layering or advancement of certain materials because they've been found in crash retrieval? We're not able to walk back because this is so interwoven. So saying that UAP is off limits, that's like saying, let's go home. Let's, maybe can we still use fire? Maybe, let's look into it. Can you still use rocks? So many of the fields of technology would be off limits. So honestly, we don't know how to, this idea, once you're in that, you don't even know. It's like saying, stop using math. So the entrepreneurs are getting inspired. They're seeing things. And so this is kind of humorous to scientists. So we both appreciate that people are talking about crash retrievals and reverse engineering. Are there crash retrievals? Well, are there crashes? I mean, there's deer retrievals where I live. I mean, a crash seems a lot more interesting than a deer to pick up. And anybody who knows an engineer says the first time you see anything of interest, you're certainly going to reverse engineer it. So whether that happens inside government programs or whether it happens out in the streets, Americans and people around the world are seeing this phenomena, and those that build things are saying, what do we build together? So we've seen these on a number of occasions. We brought some high-ranking scientists down to folks who are able in spots where these show up more frequently. And it's worth noting that there are people, a number of groups of people who are currently pulling in or attracting craft, and other phenomena. And some people just happen to see them. I'm looking right at you, Ron. We saw a lot of these. But so there are people that have seen these infrequently. There are people who have seen these on a day-to-day basis. When we've spoken with scientists, over the past year or two, and so this is coming out of places that some would see as the scientific establishment. And can we talk about this? Can we not? And some of these conversations hadn't taken place as openly. When they did, what we found was when we go into rooms and we talk with people who are innovators, it's usually 30 to 50% of people will share that they've seen or experienced anomalous phenomena. And sometimes they say, oh no, I haven't seen a UAP. And then they say, well, I did see this orb over a football field and, it was huge. And then, so people have seen things, and we've had to have the conversation with leaders in science where we say, by the way, times have changed. There's all this great work that's been done towards disclosure. And when we started talking to people about it, where we might have thought it was 1 in 20 or 1 in 100, seems like it's more.
Yeah. So what I found, my own minor experiments, if you will, is it's around 1 in 8. I think around 1 in 8 people have actually seen something. Let's see what she says here.
Like 1 in 3 or 2 in 3 or maybe 3 in 3 and 3 people.
Wow, 1 in 3. Okay, that's a lot. Maybe she did certain events. She did mention Skywatcher. People's minds changing. Yeah, and that's why they can't come out and officially say, hey, this is legit, because immediately it would be like fire sale on New Science.
People aren't talking about it. And so we've had the conversation, which is, it is not credible or viable to act like this isn't going on. So it's a little, we use the analogy that it's a little bit like whale watching. It's both normal to, if you live by the coast only, certainly. But if you live by the coast, you have access to get on the water, there's a percentage of people who would have seen whales. There's a percentage who haven't. It's normal both ways. So nothing to feel like, special or not special, regardless, but it's ubiquitous. So if you can't go in front of a room of people, if you've seen that and it's credible, and if you haven't seen it, we say, listen, people are saying this, they know. So to be credible, you do need to acknowledge it's out there. There's so much data. There's so much people have on their iPhones. There's so many people who will speak to the programs on the high side they're in, but the low side, is not waiting for agreement. They're not, the Fortune 1, the US government can lead this. We can try to figure out what benefit we have from the great work people in this country and perhaps around the world have done, or people are ready to move forward. And when I was in government, I used to receive proposals, without going into the details in any of them, in various fields of technology, where people think they're the only ones who are going to say, no, any idea you have, believe me, dozens of people are working at the same time. So this is something that right now, both in this country and around the world, there are so many people that are eager to build this, and a number of them are already building these things up. So just because you don't see it doesn't mean that it isn't happening all over the place.
That was my same experience in government, right? I worked in simulator systems for a few years, and we went to make all these new updates. We spent years working on making updates to the F-16 simulator system that we made. And then I went to find out that there are 16 separate simulator systems run on different architecture, different software, different companies. 16 running software for the same platform, right? There's minor variations in different F-16s depending where you are, but you can change all those stuff. You can easily change that stuff with software. You don't need 16 different variations, and they're all stovepiped, and we couldn't share information between subsidiaries of Lockheed, right? We couldn't get information on the simulator system from Lockheed Aero because Lockheed Aero is not the same as Lockheed Martin. It's a subsidiary, and they would not share with each other. We also noticed when we gave software, the software was owned by the government. When we gave it to these companies, it would come back inside saying like Boeing proprietary. That's what it would say. And all of a sudden it was their proprietary software because they worked on it, even though it was our software and we gave them the contract and we paid them as the government to work on this stuff, all separated. So I did this effort to try and combine it to merge all of it back so the government owned the software and that there was one base software system based on the actual code inside the jet. But then what happens is we move, right? The temporary military officers have to move. We move on, and who is left? The bureaucrats and the civilian. And what are they going to do? Who knows? But I know what the contractors are going to do, and they're going to maximize profits. And it's not even the contractors on that we worked with; it's the executives, right? The ones writing the contracts that determine the money for the shareholders, and that's really where it all goes to crap. But yeah, for sure, so many people work on this. Great to hear. I love her. I love the way she's talking about this. So awesome.
Both in this country and abroad. So if we need to lead, if we want to lead, we need to be active. So I'm looking, we always listen with respect to innovators and entrepreneurs. And I want to thank so many of you for sharing what you've seen. There is an opportunity. I expect more scientists are going to be engaging directly with the phenomena. And as scientists, they're going to be doing experiments and methods. Okay, so if you want to talk about something that people talk even less about than UAPs. So the thing that was even more of a third rail than UAPs is the sources and methods for some of this. So as you're hearing about, there's a number of teams that are working to calm this phenomena, and they're talking about all these different things. Some of them have these, ultra exotic protocols. And then one of the groups that we went to visit with some scientists, their protocol was prayer. And it was not some exotic thing. It was the Our Father, the Hail Mary, conversation. And I'm not trying to constrain it to any denomination or any faith or lack thereof, because I think one of the hesitancies people have is they want this to be for everybody and not to be specific or linked with one thing. But sources and methods, when we're talking science, there are people through meditation or very, day-by-day prayer are calling in these craft, and these orbs. So it's science. Let's talk about what it is and then assess it.
That's great. I'm so glad Avi Loeb is sitting right there. I know he was there, and I know he saw this. And I hope she's looking right at him, like, there you go, man. We can show you. I don't know. She might be looking at him. Maybe they're making eye contact right now. But there you go, Avi. Consider that.
Well, thank you.
There he is right there. So she was looking, I don't know, maybe she's looking this general area, but maybe she's looking right at Avi. And look, Ryan Graves scooted over. We called it man spacing, right? Is every other in the fighter community, you don't sit right next to another dude. It was stupid. Yeah.
So my first question actually is to you, Anna. So there was a recent statement by a government official, and it kind of went unnoticed. I think it was a few weeks ago, where they said we are now manipulating space-time. We have the ability to manipulate space-time. So I'll let that sink in for a moment. That was an official statement by a U.S. government representative. You can elaborate on that.
Well, there's certainly been publicly visible funding that has gone into that. And I'll say a couple things before I would say there's a much better expert in the audience, Dr. Julia Mossbridge, in terms of space-time work. Also, that's something that Dr. Hal Kutoff with space-time metric engineering has been very active in. So there's been plenty of work on that, and there's a lot that's going on.
So in the backdrop of that,
So, yeah, again, I already railed on space time, right? What is space time? When you say they say space time metric, right? And that sounds all fancy. That's just like the x coordinate of the three-dimensional space time coordinates that they made, right? In the Minkowski geometry. So space time metric is just like, if I can get it, it's just like the up, down. That's the metric, right? That's all it is. When you talk about space time metric, it's just the coordinate system for how light is gonna bend and how matter will move, right? That's it. So it sounds all complicated, like space-time metric, but all it is a coordinate. And space-time is really just like a coordinate system. So the null geodesics.
the National Science Foundation has been a fundamental.
Oh, and sorry, just one quick
Oh.
thing to say. But by the way, we also, a few of us were also, maybe several of us in the room, about over a year ago, were on the National Mall at the National Academy of Sciences, where it was National Space Week. And there were some presenters from around the world. And that also included a representative from the Chinese government, presumably the CCP. And the presentation that they were putting up included requests for, we want to work with people on, I believe it was space-time metric engineering. It was gravitational control, and it was also alien life off planet, amongst other things like renewables. So the Chinese are literally coming down to the National Mall and saying, hi, come talk to us about this. And so, come on, seriously? Another thing that they said, by the way, in terms of many of us have been advocating for much higher levels of capital to go into innovation and also into space infrastructure, which does not have access to the terrestrial financial tools like debt. So if you buy a house, most people, they're making a smaller down payment, 20%, 5%, whatever they can do, more of a minimum. In space, it's typically, you've got to front all of the money up front. If you're not going to build a hospital for the individual patient, you need to have the financial model. So anyways, when I was trying to figure out what was the space budget for China, they wouldn't tell me. But the gentleman did look at me in disdain. He's talking to all of you. He said, when we look at putting up a space station, we view that as that costs the same amount of money as putting down a couple of kilometers of metro. Basically, we're going to do that all day, every day. So if we can't figure out how to make the investments to win in these transformational markets for abundance, for societal benefits, and for economic growth and gain, we're going to be left behind. So so the people that are moving forward. We really hope that the U.S. government, Fortune 1, is able to share some of the great work that's been done, previously across all these fields, but the private sector is moving forward.
Folks,
Boom. It's amazing. I love it. I love she sits back too. She's like grabbing the microphone. Amazing speaker. Yeah. And I think that's fantastic. And she mentioned China there. China will be moving forward and they will be putting investments. I think Starship is going to change the game though. And they don't have Starship. China doesn't have it yet. How long will it take them to build one? Probably not that many years. They're good at copying.
we're going to have time for only two very quick questions. We're already way over our time, and we have to unfortunately surrender this room back over to folks. So let me finish. I've got two here, and then afterwards, if you want to get with our guests, you can. We're not going to have time to open it up right now for public questions. But I have, let me get to this real quick. And if we could, our guests can please keep the answer as succinct as possible before we actually get kicked out of the room. Let me start with you, Anna. The National Science Foundation has been a fundamental pillar of some of America's revolutionary technology and concepts for many decades. How can the NSF help the government now concerning the topic of UAPs?
Well, I guess one of the things that's just publicly visible is that we have been, when I was formerly at NSF, I would just say that there's lots of publicly visible content of us being very forward on the topic, listening to innovators, working with strong colleagues from across the interagency. So I think that NSF has shown, and NSF leadership has also just been extremely supportive. So I just want to be very clear. I left the government because I'm excited about building things in the private sector, and I've only ever received the greatest support and collaboration from my interagency colleagues and from the agencies with which I worked, who are extremely forward on all areas of innovation, but certainly UAP fits within that, including our publicly visible awards that were made to fund UAP science. There's great people that are highly supportive, particularly over there.
Excellent, very encouraging. Thank you. Mike, last question. You were on the NASA UAP independent study team. My question for you is, what were the recommendations of the NASA UAP independent study team, and how should those recommendations be implemented?
I'm sure, or I believe Mike probably gave him that question. Like, hey, ask me this question. If he didn't, that's an amazing question still from Lou.
Well, it's pretty close to time, Lou. Thank you for that question. I'll focus on two of those recommendations. We already discussed going through the NASA archives with an AI ML system to get the data, just a few examples of which we were able to show today, again, which could be quite extraordinary. Candidly, I think there are companies that would even volunteer to do that work for NASA. But the second one, and I really appreciate you showing that photo, which was taken by a commercial pilot. And one of the great disappointments I had when I was on the UAP independent study team was I was asking the FAA, how many reports have you gotten from commercial pilots? Are those reports being archived? How are we keeping track of that? And I got confusion and no straight answers. And here I'd like to give credit to Brian Gracie again for suggesting that we leverage NASA's Aviation Safety Reporting System, ASRS, which has been operating for decades, has hundreds of thousands of cases. And this is a confidential system where pilots, crew can call in about safety anomalies that they've experienced. It's worked phenomenally well. We should be leveraging this system for the reporting of UAP. It can be done quickly, it can be done efficiently, and the amount of data that we will receive would be amazing. Additionally, the images that I showed you was from the Commercial and Payload Service Program. Public-private partnerships have driven all of this. I'm so excited for the democratization of space and the data that we will get from that. This was just one example today. As SpaceX, Blue Origin, Redwire, other companies move forward, all with their own cameras, all with their own systems, we're going to get a lot more data. But NASA still holds on to a lot of it. So, for example, with what I presented, we need the raw data. We need timestamps. We need data in a format where we can do true academic research. So if we were just to do those two things, and again, with new support from Congress, I think, to push that, I think NASA can play a tremendously important role, and particularly the aviation community and the commercial space community. The amount of data we get, I think, will completely shift the level of sophistication on this topic.
That's a great point. And yeah, like I said at the beginning, I expected him to talk about the ASRS. And yes, that would have saved Lou on this, right? Because you have many volunteers. I interviewed a MUFON volunteer. He went through his exact protocol, what he goes into. They're trained, and most of the things he looks through, right? Like well over 90% of the cases he looks at is something just really strange. Optical illusions. You can see basically space flares from Starship launches, etc. Just crazy things that people don't normally see, but can turn out to be mundane examples like that pareidolia, or however you say it, pareidolia, where you have interesting optical illusions, right? So they can go through that and find the really key cases, right? And you can look through. I'll put a link in the description to that investigator. But basically, he's found now two actual anomalous cases, right, out of all the ones he's looked at. So most of them are going to be mundane things, right? Over 90% are going to be mundane explanations, yes, but we're interested in the ones that are not. People say, Nick Pope, I believe, says 5%. And so, yes, we need more data, and then we have the volunteers. People will sift through all that stuff. They enjoy it. It's fun. And you can find those gold the 5% of the gold, like my gold says.
And I think there's also probably about 20 or 30 hours of some of that forward interagency content in the Space Disruptors Day and the Ecosystemic Futures podcast, which we have Diane in the room here today. So thank you, Diane, for helping get that information out broadly.
I do have to say, though, I'm a little less optimistic than Anna relative to the adoption in government. As I said during my testimony, that particularly academic members of the NASA UAP Independent Study Team were threatened, outright threatened. Not for saying UAP are real, but for just having the temerity of even reviewing the topic. You can't do science in that environment. And part of the reason that I'm calling for Congress to help is there's still a great deal of skepticism, even just at NASA, and careers that get ended just for having, again, the temerity to research for it. So
It's so ridiculous, right? So unscientific. Like these scientists are saying, how can you look into that? It's ridiculous. And then you look back in history and it's always been that way. Like the mainstream argument's always proven wrong at some fundamental level. And the MUFON investigator is Ron Drost. I don't want to get his name wrong, but Ron Drost.
I think it's incumbent of all of us to push for real science, objective science, overcome that stigma. Let's get to the data because our economy and our national security may be depending on it.
And I think you contributed so much. So what I would say is some of the things that you experience, or that Lou, and Chris and others experience, there's that body of having been able to point to those leaders. So we had the advantage of being able to point to your study, and to this prior work. So, and again, I think there's the opportunity for the government, but I would say that it's not, there are industries that move forward that are not forwarded by the government. But I think just to be something very important that came out, because sometimes if we say, oh, UAP this, UAP that, there's going to be some great technologies that come out of that. That is very fluffy, and who cares? So I think something that I got briefed on in an unclassified, just informal, no classification level environment, and both in personal capacity, but then I later brought that person in to brief others in the agency. Is there a real and meaningful technologies that have come from these programs? And I think with a lot of this information, you're going to see that the story about it has been in the internet for decades, perhaps. So what I have, though, on from a very credible source was that, yes, there are people who say that this came out of the UAP programs when we talk about lasers and semiconductors. And that was so important. Semiconductors, the top 10 companies today, a $6.5 trillion industry that we all benefit from and underpins our global economy. That is something that it's not just, oh, maybe we'll get something. It's that there are tremendous people who have built things, both in classified and unclassified environments. And that's been, put out by so many authors and people in the news, but some arts are in environments that we can say this is taken seriously. And those people have told the government that, yes, there's been real advantage on some of these most important core technologies from coming from crash retrievals.
Wow, that's amazing. Yeah, if you look at our semiconductors, right, it really comes down to silicon. And we talked in part one, they asked about metamaterials and how is it made? How are the materials actually made? If you looked at some materials before you had known about semiconductors and you saw it was just made of silicon, layers of silicon, could that have led you towards semiconductors? Because semiconductors work on what we understand of quantum effects, right? Basically, you have a 0 or a 1. There's nothing in between. It's a discrete levels. That's it. So the logic gate is a 0 or a 1, and it effectively jumps across that. I took a hardcore physics class at the Air Force Academy, and we went into semiconductors, and I mean the math gets really strange. It's all just letters at that point, and I would argue we still don't understand how that works, and we still don't understand discrete levels and how semiconductors have actually even work, right? But ultimately it comes down to silicon. And the reason we can keep making smaller and smaller chips, right down to 9 nanometers and then 7 nanometers and then 4 nanometers, the reason we're able to just continue boosting the processing power, Moore's law, etc., is because of silicon. Right? If silicon did not have that ability, if silicon was not here on the planet, we would definitely not have the amazing computer breakthroughs that we have. So that is really interesting. I did not know semiconductors came from that. I mean, I guess you could see lasers, right? Because they always use like light technology, laser kind of beams coming down from UAPs. But semiconductors makes a great argument, right? And I could see how that would happen if you have metamaterial and then you're analyzing it and you say, what are these layers of silicone, right? And then they're doping it, right? Is it doped with certain materials? Do you know that you should dope the silicone with germanium and other things like that? Did they learn that from looking at these advanced materials? That's really interesting. The other thing I really enjoyed about her talk, probably one of my favorite from this whole part, from this whole hearing, she even talked about the consciousness aspect, right? Somebody finally mentioned it, saying, yeah, sources and methods like Skywatcher, can you attract these craft, attract these objects? And she said by using prayer, right? Really interesting. And she mentioned there, and then she talked basically kind of talked out of it, but she at least mentioned it and said clearly, yeah, there are sources and methods.
And I think to get the government to take it seriously, we need to engage the public. We've got to get outside of the UAP bubble. And Dan Farrow did a tremendous movie, Age of Disclosure. It's really a true story in many ways. It's extraordinary. Himself and Jay Stratton. If we can touch the public, if we can get them engaged, if we can get them the same information that we just saw, I think that would be completely transformative.
Well, since time is of the essence, first of all, thank you sincerely for your participation. It was a fantastic conversation. Let me leave a couple of thoughts here, if I may, before we say final farewell. One of the recommendations we made to Congress is the generation of a national intelligence strategy that would be promulgated on an annual basis, just like we do for other hard targets. It's a system that we have perfected already. And then right on the heels of that, a national strategy every year, annual strategy on UAP drone. Basically, any unattributed objects that are in our skies, we should have a strategy for it, because we're seeing both on the combat field and even in the streets of New York, we're seeing technologies that we can't really explain, and frankly could be used against us in a very nefarious way if we don't get a handle on it. Two, what I'd like to do is propose, and hopefully Congress at some point will be open to this, that we should do a forum like this every year for the American public and for the media, and allow Congress to get to the bottom of things and ask the questions that they normally wouldn't be able to ask, and bring in the Department of Justice and the intelligence community, the Department of Defense, and bring them all here. Why not? Right? Sitting down here in front of the American people, by the way I look at it, you're paying their paychecks anyways, right? We kind of owe you some answers, and they owe Congress some answers.
I just so happy to see Lou up there, and I know everyone makes mistakes, and that photo, well, I'm sure they'll just rag on him about that photo and why did he present it and etc. But he's dedicated, he's focused, and he's gonna stick with it. And seeing him behind the podium of the House of Representatives is going to send a message around the world, I think. And you are going to have more people taking this seriously, and they will be overseas, right? At some point, like she mentioned there, the Chinese are asking. This is just going to continue to ratchet up the pressure and just keep ratcheting it, right? It's like this, just a slow, systematic army ground game, right? And he's from the army, and so it's awesome. I hope we see this every year.
I would also say, please let your members of Congress know that you support this. If you like what Representative Burleson and Representative Luna and Burchett and others have done here today, let them know, right? They need to hear this. And so other members of Congress can see this and say, hey, that works, right? Tell them that. They need to hear that feedback. Unless you don't want whatever you said. But that would be my suggestion. Last but not least, I want to thank specifically our members of Congress, because at the end of the day, they're your representatives. They represent this country. They are very much part of this country. And they are the reasons why you are all here today and we are here. They have facilitated this. They have sponsored this. They have gone another way to put their political careers potentially in jeopardy for even having this conversation for you. So if you appreciate this, let them know. And last but not least, thank you to every one of you. Again, our friends in the media, the folks that came over here, some cases came from across the world and traveled here very long distances to be with us here today. Thank you very much. It's very meaningful, and we're all here because it's been a group effort. So with that said, let's give a round of applause for our guest here.
Okay, my overall thoughts is that was just a blockbuster hearing. Not a hearing, I guess. It was a meeting, but amazing work. Everyone involved. Wish I was there. Yeah, I'll try and get to a future one. I think it'd be really exciting to talk to all these people in person and really thank the Congress people. And they are our representatives, like Lou said, and they do listen to people. So yeah, call in. When I talked to Lester Nare, he said it definitely makes a difference. I talked to James Fox. He said the biggest thing we can do is talk to our congresspeople, apart from watching his show or his movies, obviously. The biggest way we can help is by calling the congresspeople, letting them know that you do care about it, right? And they are supposed to listen to the will of the people, and they definitely listen to the will of voters. If you say it's one of your major issues. So I thought I wasn't super excited about the innovation fund, right? I mean, I already heard from Mike Gold, pretty much knew what he was going to say. I know he's a great speaker. So I was more interested to hear like Eric Davis and Chris Mellon, but they were great speakers. So Mike Gold and Anna, I've never seen her before, but very excited to hear her thoughts and just to speak in a public forum like that, giving kind of a push to entrepreneurs out there saying, yeah, don't wait for the government, right? The government is not going to lead on this. Obviously, they're held back by fear, stigma, decades of bureaucratic tape. And so don't wait for them. Just move forward. Thought that was really exciting. And she mentioned the consciousness aspect, which we hadn't heard really at all, any of the hearings, right? This is the first real mention we've seen in a official manner. And she also mentioned Skywatcher. She didn't mention them by name, but she said there are organizations, and that's what Skywatcher is doing. So civil organizations just getting more exposure. And I think, yeah, it's only going to continue from here. I don't see this movement just like dying somehow, right? It'd be great to have more Congress people there, get more bipartisan Congress. I don't know if any Democrats were there actually, so that's unfortunate. But like Paulina Luna said, we're going to get 2 more hearings, and so awesome. It's like a fire hose now. There's just like so much information. It's difficult to keep up. So thanks for your support. Consider subscribing if you'd like this video, and I could definitely use the support. And if you want background information, go to patreon.com/Chris Lehto and support for as little as $5 a month. It definitely makes a difference. You can also get merch there, and you can also become a YouTube member here in YouTube, and you'll get early access to the videos. So thanks again. Come to Lehto Files Discord to continue the discussion, and check out our sister channel, UAP Society. Have a great rest of your day. Peace.